This is K.M. Weiland, and you are listening to the 404th episode of the Helping Writers Become Authors podcast. After launching the Creating Character Arcs workbook last week, I'm happy to be settling fully back into focusing on writing my Portal Fantasy sequel, Dreambreaker. I took a 10-day vacation to see family in September, but with one thing and another, I ended up having to be away from my writing for nearly 3 weeks. It was a good break, but it's funny how even now, after almost a month back, I'm still feeling the loss of those 3 weeks. I guess it's kind of like that whole absence makes the heart grow fonder thing. I'm still busy with this whole house remodeling project, which completely took over my summer, in a good way. So I'm still busy nearly every day trying to finish up some painting projects before the weather turns cold on me. It means I'm not able to dedicate any extra time to writing right now, as good as that sounds. But I'm steadily pressing forward with the book and enjoying how much I'm enjoying it right now. The latest post on my blog is your guide to preparing for a successful NaNoWriMo. Get ready for your best November writing spree yet. Preparing for National Novel Writing Month now will give you the foundation to outline a solid novel. To read the post, visit helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. And now, I hope you enjoyed this week's podcast, 4 reasons you're confused about scene structure. Scene structure is the backbone of strong narrative storytelling. Built properly, scenes effortlessly link one to another to create a chain of give and take, cause and effect, action and reaction, question and answer. The whole point of scene structure is to create an ebb and flow that mimics how humans balance forward momentum with the necessary introspection to process that momentum. Another analogy might be extroversion and introversion. Classic scene structure, as I discuss in my book, Structuring Your Novel, looks like this. Part 1 is scene, or the action part. It's divided into 3 parts. Goal. The character wants something on the scene level that will ultimately help him reach his overall plot goal, and he tries to get it. 2. Conflict. Character is met with an obstacle to obtaining his goal. 3. Outcome. Usually disastrous in the sense that the character does not achieve the goal or achieves only part of it. Part 2 is the sequel or reaction part. It's also divided into 3 parts. Number 1 being reaction. The character reacts to the outcome. 2. Dilemma. The character must figure out how to overcome the new complications and still move forward toward his main plot goal. And 3, decision. The character decides upon a new scene goal to cope with the new complications and move forward toward the main plot goal in a, hopefully, more effective way. Now, I receive a lot of questions from writers who seem to be confused about scene structure, but in fact know a lot more than they're giving themselves credit for. Here are 5 important facts about scene structure that can help you stop overthinking the process. Fact number 1. Structural scenes have nothing to do with scene breaks. Let's just get this one out of the way right at the start. A structural scene is one that includes all of the structural pieces mentioned just previously. It has nothing to do with the popular concept of scene as a portion of the story divided from the rest of the story by a scene break or chapter break. Several structural scenes can reside within one chapter or scene. Or a single structural scene can span many chapters. Fact number 2. Scene structure isn't always exact. Even if you've already mastered the basics, scene structure remains a complex subject, if only because it isn't always a rock-solid principle. The idea is to create an overall framework within your story that follows this give and take of scene and sequel. But this doesn't necessarily mean every single moment within your story must nail every one of those beats. The various parts of scenes and sequels will often bleed over into one another, sometimes expanding, sometimes compressing, sometimes combining. It's an often intuitive dance that authors have to be confident enough to feel their way through. Fact number 3. Incidents and happenings don't follow proper structure. Sometimes you'll write a scene that doesn't follow proper structure at all, but is still necessary to the story. If you're trying to religiously follow proper scene structure, this may have you freaking out. But actually, it's totally acceptable to write the occasional scene that does not include the above-mentioned integers of proper structure. In Techniques of the Selling Author, the late great Dwight V. Swain defines two possible approaches. An incident is a sort of abortive scene in which your character attempts to reach a goal, but he meets with no resistance, no conflict. A happening brings people together, but it's non-dramatic because no goal or conflict is involved. You'll want to use incidents and happenings sparingly and with care, since too many of them will quickly derail the forward progress of your plot. But neither should you be afraid of including them where necessary. And fact number 4. Scenes and sequels can be as big or as small as you want. Harking back to the beginning of this list, your scenes and sequels can be so big they span many chapters, or so small there are several of them within a single chapter. This is especially true of the sequel portion of the structure. Very often, in the heat of action, characters will experience a disastrous outcome, immediately process their reaction, face the dilemma, come to a decision, and begin acting upon a new goal, all within the space of a few sentences. Indeed, the whole concept of action-reaction can be found in motivation-reaction units, or MRUs, on the sentence level. So, although you don't need to particularly worry about the size of your scenes and sequels, there are two key things to keep in mind. Number 1, with few exceptions, you want to make sure all the pieces of the structure are present, at least implicitly, no matter how short or long your scene or sequel. Number 2, scene structure controls your story's pacing. Rapid-fire scene-sequel pairings, or even lengthy scenes with short sequels, will contribute to a fast pace. Longer scene sequels, or disproportionately longer sequel segments, will slow down your pacing. You'll want to use a good mix of both options. Most of the questions I receive about scene structure are from writers who understand the structural aspect, but are trying too hard to make it perfect. There's no need to obsess about your scene structure. It's there as yet another of those infamously piratical guidelines. Solid scene structure throughout your story will help you create a cohesive narrative in which you never have to wonder whether or not a scene is necessary or causal. But don't feel there's no room to breathe, to flex, or to let the narrative itself dictate the ebb and flow. Previously, I talked about how one way to look at scene and sequel is to think of them as question and answer. Today I'm going to give you yet another helpful analogy, this one inspired by a John Truby talk I listened to last year, in which he equated scene to action and sequel to lesson. I like this view because it emphasizes the importance of the sequel. We all get that stuff is supposed to happen in a story, action is supposed to happen, goals are supposed to be pursued, but that's not enough. And that is where scene structure becomes so powerful in linking plot structure with character arc. With this in mind, we could reinterpret the original approach to scene structure more like this. Again, it's in 2 parts. Part 1 is scene or action, which is divided into 3 parts. Number 1, goal. The character wants something, but tries to achieve it in a way that isn't fully informed by the thematic truth. 2, conflict. Because the character is not yet mentally or spiritually equipped to understand how to pursue his goal with the truth-empowered tools he needs to accomplish it, he meets obstacles, which he either partially created himself and/or simply failed to recognize. And 3, outcome. When the character fails, partially or wholly, to reach his scene goal, he is presented with the opportunity for growth and learning. And that brings us to part 2, which is sequel, which is the reaction or lesson part. Again, divided into 3 parts, number 1 of which is reaction. The character reacts to the outcome with the growing realization that his lie-based tactics are failing him. 2, dilemma. the character is presented with the opportunity to learn from his failure. Not just how to do it better next time, but more importantly, why did he fail this time? And number 3, decision. Depending on his thematic arc, the character will either learn something about his truth or further reject it and form a new plot goal that will help him act accordingly. Once you know what scene and sequel look like, you'll start spotting them in all your favorite books and movies. A good rule of thumb, whenever a character looks confused and or has that "I got it" look in his eyes, he's probably in the midst of a sequel. Not long ago, word player Becky Jones-Fettig requested, "I would love to see a scene from one of KM's books dissected into the scene and sequel format for instruction purposes." Is that possible? Definitely. But because of the nature of a lengthy excerpt, an entire chapter from my historical diesel punk novel Storming, in this case, I am not going to attempt to read that entire thing here on the podcast, but will instead send you to my blog where you can read the entire thing and see my notes where I'm indicating the different parts of the scene structure as I've used them there. And you can find that on my website at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com/scene-structure-2. Scene structure offers writers a reliable set of guidelines for crafting scenes that work. Understanding the interplay between scene and sequel can also help you open up the vast options for enhancing them within your plot and your theme. Thank you for listening to the Wordplay Podcast. To read a transcript of this episode, you can visit my website at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. And be sure to check back again next week.